Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Welcome back. Appreciate you being here. If you've found us, maybe there's a reason. Maybe you were doing some searching. Today, we're going to talk about traumas. We all have had them in our lives, all different types, from large to small. When we say that word, it's a very strong word. People may think, you might be thinking, oh, I've never really been through a trauma, nothing major. But we have, and we have to heal from certain things. And that can potentially hold you back from moving forward in your life in the direction that you're feeling. Maybe it's abundance. Maybe it's a relationship. Maybe it's your job. One of the ways to work through that is through craniosacral therapy. And we've got somebody today. I don't know anybody that knows physiology, the physiological aspect of this, the energy aspect of it, more than her. KellyAnne Riden is back with us on the program. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Very well, very well. You
Uh,
are located in Pennsylvania, and that's where you do all of your work. And the last time we got together, we talked about, call them the little T traumas. That could be you're a kid, you hear a comment, you hear somebody talking, or somebody says something to you. Maybe you got bullied, and then you internalized it, and then you carried that with you for the rest of your life, and that is a limiting belief for you in many regards. Today, we're going to talk about, call them the big T traumas, right?
yes. So working with big T traumas, they can have a lot of layers and a lot of components to it. There can be an emotional layer, which is a huge part of it. There can be a physical layer to it. There can be sexual trauma. There can be so many issues, like relational wise, not just from like the perpetrator and the victim, but circumstantially people who were either in on the situation, around it, family members who swept it under the rug, and family members that went after it in not so supportive ways, or they were trying to be supportive, but they ended up making it messier. So there's a whole lot of just balls of messes when it comes to large T traumas. So a lot of times when those types of traumas are coming in, they already know what their trauma is, which often is helpful in actually the part where we will be working on their body. So that's when we go straight to our list here on the chart with the vertebrae. So we will be working directly with the vertebrae that correlates to specifically their trauma. So let's take sexual trauma, for example, whether it be sexual assault, rape, or someone just being inappropriate with them. That is actually in L3, L4. So we would be working on those vertebrae while the person is
Wow.
completely clothed. So the person is going to have to give consent for us to touch them. Now, we are not touching them inappropriately. We are touching them on the nerve lines from the spine. So if they're laying down and say my fingertips are the vertebrae in the spines, we will just, the person, well, let me do it this way. We'll be putting like the pressure of like a dime on that vertebrae. Normally when we do, they're like jumping out of their socks like, oh, that's really sore. And that's a good indication of we're right where we need to be. So generally how we're working with that is I have a diagram here. These are like the fascial layers. So you can see the horizontal midlines where they're kind of running through. So generally when we have one finger on the spine, we're also putting our hand on top of the body. So the spine and on top of the body's in between. And what that does is in these diaphragms here is you can imagine that there's going to be a whole bunch of organs and fascial layer tissue, organ layer tissue, and all the cells that are made up of each all the way in between. Now, within that, there are what's called fulcrum points, fulcrum lines. So those are, I think we discussed this in previous episodes before, where a midline and a fulcrum line are very similar, but basically a fulcrum point is where your body organizes itself off of. So I think we had used the example of like when you're born, you built yourself as a single-celled organism in the correct order. How did you do it? Well, your body organizes itself off of what's called fulcrum lines. The thing is with fulcrum lines, yes, there's major ones, which would be like your midline and then your horizontal line that your body organizes itself off of. However, fulcrum lines are a little bit different in the sense that they are structures that can move, and they actually are the things that help things function and can actually make them function differently in that sense. So when a trauma enters the body, a fulcrum line can move, can shift. And that's why it can have a physical effect. That's why things left undealt with when you're having an emotional component to a trauma, they can make you sick. They can make you vomit. Just thoughts reoccurring can make you angry, nasty, belligerent, snap. It can drive you towards alcohol. It can drive you towards drugs. It can give you very, very severe motivations towards things of self-destruction because you don't really have anything here that you're sitting with that is giving you physical pain. So sometimes there is this thing in the body where it's like, well, let's give there something pain-wise to concentrate on. So that envelops the self-destruction mode in which your body has a high propensity to go and then do, because sitting here alone, there is like, okay, no one's in here, no one's attacking me. Why am I hurting so bad? Let's give a reason that we can actually pinpoint and blame. And then that's when those things start happening. Fulcrum lines, when they shift, however, because they can manifest into physical ailments and they can also pull vertebrae out of alignment, that's when we're going to chiropractics. So there's a lot of components that you can be shifting in that. So in the craniosacral aspect is what we first do is we're helping their body and kind of forcing their body to deal with the trauma. Now, that doesn't mean you're reliving the trauma. So, for example, a sexual assault or a rape case, we're working with the spine, we're working with the fluid. Our hands are on the client in very gentle ways. We're not pressing into them, we're not forcing them. Generally, when we're on those areas and we give it time, we always give them space. So whether we're on the table and we're this close to the client, or our hands are way out here and we're on the client, and we are constantly checking in with this client. Do you need space? Do you want to talk about it? Do you want to sit up and just cry? What do you need? And here's where we are. Generally at the point of when you're touching them, the body's always processing. And because it's being forced to process an area where it had to reroute around just to protect itself, generally when it's processing, you can already see the person processing and they're already trying to like hold back tears. It is a very emotional process because a lot of times they do have emotional upheavals when they're with us in the treatment room, and sometimes not. Sometimes they're able to encase it, and then we get a phone call 3 days later, or we get a phone call and they just walk down to their car. So we do have those times where the body feels safer processing it out and letting it out somewhere else when they're by themselves, which does happen. And we do walk them through that process that sometimes that does happen, that can happen, and it's okay. Make space and time for your body to let that trauma up and out, especially if it's been there for many, many years. So the animal kingdom actually does this very, very well. You'll see like a lion like tackle a wildebeest and thinking it made a coup. It went off to go get the cubs, right? And then the wildebeest stands up, shakes, trembles, shuffles around, lets that trauma up and out. And when it does and it gets itself together, it runs off like it never happened again. Now, it doesn't mean it's not going to have any more instincts to run when it sees a lion. I mean, that's instinctual. That's what it needs to do to survive, right? It doesn't mean it's any less wise or no longer in tune with the dangers that are out there. It's actually probably more aware and more hyper aware of it once it either sees that happen to another or if it happens to itself, correct? So when a person is going through trauma like that, their bodies, because socially, we actually find like men struggle with this a little bit more, especially in America. Seemingly in other countries, if we get someone else that's been out of the country, raised out of the country, they generally have a lot less hard of a time being able to process their trauma. And it's just because culturally they're in a place where men can cry, men can show emotion, and it's perfectly fine and acceptable because we all as human beings are emotional. Whereas in America, we're taught, especially if you're a man, like you don't cry, you don't show pain. It's easier to just show anger and get aggressive than it is to actually sit and grieve and show anything hurtful that something hurt you because that is classified as weakness. And even in women, we do have that problem, but just women tend to be a bit more emotional beings just for how we've been created. We're more relational. We have more um, of that motherly instinct to put ourselves in, like, say, a child's position if we see them crying. And especially if it's our own child, we have a lot more sympathy and empathy and understanding. And then depending on how you're raised and all those micro traumas, how they add up, depends on how you will, deal with that situation in a kind, caring, loving way, or I don't want to deal with it, hush your little face, move on, that type of thing. So there's a lot that can be combined in it with large T traumas. You're not only dealing with a specific issue, you can be dealing with multiple tragedies. For example, like someone who has been repeatedly abused through childhood sexually by either a parent or someone in the family, because 9 times out of 10, it's always somebody that is known and close to the person. There are random acts of violence where you are just the unfortunate recipient of, just a terrible tragedy where you're just randomly chosen. It does happen and it's terrible. But in those situations, it's actually easier to walk them through the trauma, and just in the sense of, hey, this person was probably not well, probably was really abused or depraved in their life, and we know nothing about them. And oftentimes you see a lot of those people who have been randomly acted against have an easier time forgiving and moving on versus someone who has been repeatedly by a family member or a close friend. And other situations that tend to kind of make it worse in the sense it could be small traumas stacked on it. So somebody, excuse me, who like is abused by a family member and then like it becomes known, present, prevalent, but then like there's still family gatherings. Why is this person still invited? Not everybody knows. So why is this person who knows this all of a sudden telling this person, oh, stand beside the person and pose for the picture? And then it's kind of like you're feeling like almost a double betrayal, but then there's people who are, unaware, don't exactly know, don't want to take sides, don't want to disrupt, there's all these things that can happen, right? And it just keeps kind of stacking and building that large trauma, especially with repeated offenses. So what do we do with these people once we allow them to let their trauma up and out? It's not over, right? It still happens. Sometimes there's legal measures we have to encourage them, we give them the resources for. And it doesn't always happen in one session because just because a traumatic event comes up and you grieve it, craniosacral work has a lot of layers. And each layer you let up and let out, something else rises. Whether it's something that happens recently that causes a trigger for something else deeper to come up, you deal with those as they come. And then whether you're working continually on something that has either repeatedly happened or it's a specific event that has happened, but you're seeing them continually and they're in a better place for healing, that is the ultimate, right? But not sometimes that doesn't always happen. Sometimes they're still either living in the abuse, sometimes they're in a chaotic environment where they're unable to have an easier time healing. So you're still working with many different dynamics. So it's different for everybody. I actually had a grown man actually ball up in the fetal position on my table, just mouth dropped open, bawling. And he never said what it was. He never told me what he was feeling. Once that episode was over, we hold them in the craniosacral position that we have them in because they're still processing it. And generally, when you're having your hands on the part that they're processing, you keep it there, you keep the pressure the same, and you're going to feel different things in these particular fascial layers moving. Like we're actually trained to feel the different pulses, the different layers, and we're having to identify them. Okay, this is in the colon. Okay, this is in the liver, and the liver depicts anger, bitterness, resentment. That's what houses in that organ. You actually feel things sometimes pushing up in the body because they're pulsating so much. Now they're very tiny. It's not like Alien where like this thing pops out of your chest and you're like, "Ah."
Right.
It's not like that at all. But it certainly does. You can feel it. Like we even had a client that put his hand on his abdomen. He's like, "Oh my gosh, what is that? Do I need to get like an MRI?" I'm like, no, 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 no. That's the neurological responses to it processing your trauma. But if left undealt with, you would have probably had some digestive issues later on in life, whether it be an ulcer, whether it be colitis, whether it be a food allergy where your body just breaks down because it's not being able to process something that has a specific chemical in it that just kind of develops an allergy that you've never had before, or an insensitivity that's just a really high functioning insensitivity, so it causes other issues in your digestive tract. So when the people let this up and out, some people just need someone to talk to and say, this is what I'm feeling, this is where my memory went back to. And then you kind of just help walk them through it, whether you advise them to see a talk therapist, counselor, specifically in trauma, or we just listen. And then sometimes they just need to let that emotionally out. And like that gentleman, he never said a word, but he got up when he was finished crying. He said, "I don't know what you just did, but I think I just got my life back." He walked out. I never saw him again.
And there's the beauty in it.
And I said, "Praise God."
Wow. I have to tell you, KellyAnne, I'm really amazed how the body works, and that, you gave examples of the spine where different types of trauma reside. Is that
Yes.
usually where does it follow the same rule book? Let's put it that way, where,
What do you mean?
if it's let's say you gave an example of something related to a sexual abuse situation.
Yes.
It, resides in that part of the spine. That's where you hold the trauma. If it was something else, another trauma, maybe somebody passed away, your parent passed away when you were very young, and that would be a different part of the spine. It always manifests in those areas,
Yes.
identified areas.
Correct, because those nerve lines are linked to specific organs which house specific
Gotcha.
emotions. They've done scientific studies on those. So,
Sure.
for example, L3, L4 on the spine, the nerve line, if you trace it through, it actually goes to the sexual organs, which is what was violated. So it actually makes sense. It correlates to one another. It's when you have stacked emotions, because it's very rare do you have a very singular emotion. Normally it's anger, resentment, bitterness. You don't just have joy, happiness. You're giddy, you're excited. There's a lot of layers to each emotion, and that's why we deal with the I think we showed it to you last time. Let me see. I'm pretty certain we still have it here. We had the I think I let somebody borrow that one, but we have the emotional wheel with all
Sure.
the emotions on it, and it's color coded, and it shows you specifically in the middle, like there's like anger, happy, sad, depression, and then there's like smaller ones outwards that branch out, excuse me, and they become more specific. So it kind of gives you like a wide range of like, okay, if you have anger, is it, resentment? Is it, you know, devastation? Is it, all these things that it could possibly be. So you can kind of pinpoint it and get the different layers
Hmm.
within that wide range itself. So we kind of walk them through with identifying it, because if you can't identify it, then you kind of really don't know what you're working with. You're kind of floating out there in space, not understanding what you're feeling. We always encourage our clients to pinpoint what you're feeling, even if it's multiple things. What are these multiple things that you're feeling? And then we allow them and we teach them the skills to deal with that. Okay, if these are the things you're feeling, can you pinpoint the reasons? If you can't, it's okay. It is okay to not know, but still acknowledge this is the way I'm feeling. And then kind of sitting with it, allowing them to process it, taking as much time as they need. And I mean, I've had times where I've said, okay, we're at time, but if you need, I will call and cancel and reschedule my next client if you need that time. And normally at that point, people are like, no, let's get this processing moving faster. But you've given them the chance to say, you have all the
Sure.
time you need. And generally, that's when the body's like, it's safe. We can pick up the pace. And then if not, we still call and reschedule the next client, because you can never leave somebody in a processing state. It does not end well. They
Mm.
can go into severe depression states. They can become suicidal, because they're dealing with big stuff that they either have stomached for many years, pressed down, never acknowledged. You never want to leave somebody in a processing state and be like, okay, well, see you next week. Why? Hurry on up so I can change,
Yeah,
the
it's
sheet for the
45
next
minutes. You got to
client. And it's
leave
just
now.
like,
You're out. Yeah.
yeah, we
Uh,
cannot do that. Generally, with big T trauma cases, if they book an hour, we book, 90 minutes with another half an hour gap between the next. And generally, we've always been able to have time, even if we've had to extend. And we let them know that. So the grieving process is different for everybody. So again, somebody can sit up, talk about it, maybe never even cry, but they'll go home and maybe grieve it too.
I
Sometimes the
want, you
grieving
know what?
process
I don't want to
isn't
run out
over
of
in a day,
time.
isn't.
But I want to ask this
Yeah,
question. When you
go
work with
ahead.
somebody, do you know the type of trauma, or do they know, so that you can pinpoint on the spine? Or
Both,
could
both.
you could do both? Okay. Uh,
Yeah, I've actually had counselors send in cases where they're like, hey, you know what? We've hit a wall with this person. They've progressed up to here. Um, you know, they're not getting any better. Sometimes they're regressing. We really have run all of our, you know, stuff on them, and we're just not getting anywhere. Can you please help? And these clients don't say a word to me. Most of the time, they don't want to. And generally, I can find where their body is storing it. And I'm the one that has to have that conversation with them of,
mm,
hey, this is what your body's indicating. And normally we get one of two responses, because if they're coming here, normally they want the hope. So they'll say, yeah, you know what? This happened to me when I was 7. Or, hey, when you were working there, this thought came into my mind and I can't even remember. I can't believe I even remembered it. Like I was so young. Like, so you'll have those things that happen. Some people call it supernatural. I mean, I've been called all sorts of names like sorcerer and mind reader and what is it, the psychics or whatever. I
mm,
was like,
mm.
no, 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 no. There's a science to this. And basically, through my training, we have to be able to tell the difference of what layer it is. Like, is it the nerve layer? Is it the, fascial layer? Is it the organ layer? Is it the muscle layer? And like be able to feel through all of it where the trauma is stored. Because sometimes it's multiple layers and where it's stored. And it takes multiple sessions to get even just like the whole thing worked through. And even then, there's still an emotional component that is left on the other side. So it can be a long process. I always tell people generally give us 4 to 6 sessions if you're dealing with a large trauma. And each time you should be feeling better. Emotionally, you're going to feel like you've been hit by a Mack truck. It's going to be excessive, but each time you have an emotional upheaval, it's going to be a lot less intense and for a lot less duration once you start the restoration process.
Well, once you go through the
It is a
woods, so,
beautiful
so to
thing.
speak, yes, that it's life changing,
Yes.
and you can live the life that you've always wanted to because you've been carrying around this trauma. Uh, KellyAnne, fascinating. I study energy. There's different modalities out there. I had no idea that you can really pinpoint within the spine where we hold on to these traumas. Amazing. How do we find you? I know you have one location in Pennsylvania. Where is that?
Yes, it's in Camp Hill, Pennsylvania. It's at 355 North 21st Street, Camp Hill, PA. I believe the zip code is 17011, and we're Suite 300. We are in a big corporate building with multiple other businesses in it, so I am on the third floor, and there is an elevator in case that's helpful for anyone to know.
Website, phone number?
Yes, the website should be kaclinicalmassage.com, and the phone number is 717-516-0959.
Thank you so much for today. Thank you for the insight in all of this. This is even for me new territory, and I've been looking into energy, studying it, understanding it. Just fascinating how this can help people, and just proves again what we hold on to essentially for our entire lives unless you do something about it. Thanks for being here.
Yes, thanks for having me.
We'll be right back.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.